It all feels pretty overwhelming, doesn't it? The world feels overwhelming. Where we place our focus and attention feels overwhelming. I feel as a rabbi sometimes, where does my energy need to go? There are so many ways in which just feel stretched thin. I think many of us feel like that. And we're constantly in this conflict of, are we dealing with local issues, national issues, global issues? Are we dealing with ourselves, with our families, with our communities, with our city, with our state? And there's always these circles of influence and these circles, these spheres in which we find ourselves. And I think it's really important to be reminded that in Judaism, when we talk about mitzvot and the understanding that there are 613 mitzvot, and in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus that we're reading at the moment, there are so many mitzvot, but mostly they're connected to the rituals of sacrifice. But of course, in this week's Parshat, the mitzvot of keeping kosher and refraining from eating unkosher animals. But when the rabbis talk about mitzvot, there's the mitzvot that are ta'aseh. These are the mitzvot you will do. And there are the mitzvot that are lo ta'aseh, that you will not do. And then there are mitzvot that are really ben adam la'atzmo, which means really between ourselves and ourselves, our own inner lives, our lives of prayer, the way we take care of our own bodies, the way we constantly try to refine ourselves and be the best people we can be. And then there's ben adam lechavero, between a person and society. And then there's literally between a person and their fellow human being. And then there's ben adam lemakom, which is between a person and God. And you could ask sometimes, which of these is this particular section of Torah asking? When we're talking about the laws of kashrut, the laws of keeping kosher, we're talking about a relationship between us and the divine, or we're talking about a relationship between us and ourselves, or even are we talking about a relationship between us and others? Because even though this is not going to be the theme of my sermon, I think all three are very impacted in the choices we make around food. It can be a very spiritual act. Eating can be a very spiritual act. It can also be about our own bodies. It can be an act of preserving our own health. It can also be very ethical. We make choices around food that are ethical, and we know that some of what happens in the modern production of food is deeply unethical in the way it degrades our earth, degrades the animals, it degrades the workers who work in those plants. And so I'm just thinking on this Shabbat, as we are on the brink between Yom HaShoah last week, the day where we stand up as a community and say, never again, and never again, and never again. And I never really know what that means. And as we go into a week, as I said just now, where we're going to be commemorating Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, which is so unlike Memorial Day in America, where every single person in the state of Israel is impacted by that day, because everybody knows someone who has lost their lives, or knows someone who has lost their lives throughout the wars and the acts of terror that have happened in the establishment of Israel as a state. And so as we're in this sort of Shabbat between those two, and then of course going into Yom HaAtzmaut, I'm wondering, and I keep asking myself, where am I to put my attention? Am I going to talk about what it means to keep kosher and how spiritual that is? Or am I to talk about Israel? And as I said at the beginning, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. There's still so much to say about the aftermath of our shooting here in Boulder, and then suddenly out of nowhere there's a bomb scare a couple of days ago, and all of the ways in which we here in our own community. There are ways in which we're looking out for people within our own community. And there are so many issues. There are so many issues, and so many people who are oppressed in the world. So many, when our social action committee looks at the ways, do we want to think about the homeless in our community? Do we want to think about the Rohingya people? Do we want to think about the Syrians? Do we want to actually think like honestly, as a Jewish community, about what's happening in Israel, what the real effects of the occupation are for Palestinians, and what's really some of the realities that are going on in that state that we so love and cherish and hope for a beautiful future. And it's, what do we think about the plight of refugees? So I want to talk for a moment about a group of people in our world who many people in the Jewish community talked about on Yom HaShoah. And it was really brought to our attention in a very important way by our member Ed Cass. But the more I read about it, the more important it is not to stay silent. In this week where we've been saying never again, recognizing that the plight of the Uyghur Muslims in China is absolutely appalling, what's going on there. And I think we have to be aware of it. And I think we have to take actions to make ourselves aware and to demand of our elected officials that something is done. There are 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. There are a Muslim minority who've been stripped of all of their basic freedom in the name of what the Chinese call re-education and political indoctrination. The men have their beards forcibly shaved off, which of course is an image we think of so much in our own history of the Shoah. The women have their veils and their hijabs taken away. Birth control is forced on the women in a brutal way, and they're tortured and they're raped. It's a really, really awful situation. They're taken from their communities, they're blindfolded, and they're loaded onto trains. So many of the images of what's going on there is reminiscent of our own history that we remembered so in such a painful way when we talk about the Shoah and when we reflect on those who are still survivors of those atrocities. And something about this issue is that it's really not partisan politics, because Mike Pompeo, as Secretary of State under the Trump administration, talked out very, very, very strongly about the Uyghurs and the human rights abuses that are going on there, as did Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. And we need to urge the current administration. We need to urge the Secretary of State. We need to urge our own elected officials to really put pressure on China to change this reality. That's part of what it means to say never again. Some people who are survivors, or some people who are the descendants of survivors, feel like never again has to only apply to the Jewish people. And they say, how dare you compare the suffering of the Holocaust to any other kind of genocide or any other suffering in the world. And the two aren't compared. I'm not saying that what's happening in China is as brutal as some of what happened in the Holocaust, but some of it really is. Some of it really, really is. And I think as we say never again this year, we have to really do everything we can to educate ourselves and to stand up and to take actions that may include boycotting in some situations, but that we really try to work for a difference in the world. The Torah, again and again and again and again in the Parshat that we just read, uses the word sheketz, shin, kuf, tzadi. And it's really usually translated as an abomination or a disgrace or something disgusting, something reprehensible. And as the Torah goes through the list of all of the animals that we can't eat, the things that creep on the ground, or the birds of prey, or the chazir, the pig, or the animals that don't have this ruminating subject, stomach that is purifying its food in a certain way, that does not have the cloven hoof, which, by the way, some of the Hasidic commentators, most notably the Sfat Emet, says the whole idea of a kosher animal is it is able to bring, it is about in the inner world and the outer world together. And the cloven hoof, the split in the hoof is about this inner dimension. And it's like by eating animals that have this capacity to be on the inside, on the outside, it's about our own capacity to think about the world outside as well as our own inner world. So as Jews, of course, we think about the spiritual relationships we have what it means to live a spiritual life, to have a life of prayer and meditation and reflection and keeping Shabbat and having some kind of discipline around what we eat and what we don't eat. But it also means we're in relationship with the world outside, those Ben Adam Lechavaro relationships, which are not just, of course, our own direct community, our own direct family, our own direct city, especially at this time, is so, so important. But sometimes the real shekets, the real disgrace and abomination, the appallingness of what we see in our world is in places far away. And in a global community like the one we live in, we can't ignore. And we have to, I think, as Jews who take seriously what the mitzvot of the Torah are all about, the idea that there are these different levels of relationship, internal, external with the world, and maybe vertical is not the right word, but however we see our relationship with the divine. That all three of those are really important. We can't be deeply spiritual people if we don't care about the world around us. And sometimes caring about the world around us means opening our eyes to some of the suffering that's going on. And of course, the Uyghurs are not the only group who are being oppressed and victimized and abused and sort of experiencing a genocide right now. There are other people in the world. We think about the continuing plight of Syrians and the Rohingya in Myanmar, and there are just many places. And like I say, it's absolutely overwhelming to think about all of these different causes that we can connect ourselves to. Where do I give my money? Where do I give my energy? Who do I write letters about? And of course, we all have causes that we really most care about and we're most passionate about. And I have no judgment about people who are passionate about certain causes that may not include this particular group of people. But right now, on this Shabbat, just days after Yom HaShoah, with those words that can mean everything and can mean nothing when we say never again. As I wrote in a piece that I wrote reflecting on Yom HaShoah, never again too often becomes yet again. Our world we're seeing so much bigotry and hatred in so many different forms coming up in the world. So in the same way that quote I quoted earlier by Rabbi Abraham Salanta about kashrut, saying the Torah only mentions twice about the chazir, about the pig being unkosher, and yet what Jew, even if they choose to eat them, what Jew doesn't know that the pig is an unkosher animal? And yet the Torah has so much else that it has to say about our relationship to humanity, about our relationship to the wider world. The fact that the Torah, as I've said so many times before, not twice, not 3 times, not 5 times, but 36 times, has some kind of reference to loving the stranger, because we know what it is to have the heart and the soul of the stranger because of our own experience, which of course on one level is about the Exodus from Egypt, which we commemorated in our Passover celebrations, but it's also about the stranger far away, the stranger in our midst, like the refugees and people seeking asylum in this country. But Ger is also, I think, a stranger far away, like these people who are experiencing such awful abuse and oppression in China, in Xinjiang province. We're in this incredible period in the Jewish calendar of the Hebrew calendar, going from Zman Cherotenu, the season of our freedom, to Zman Matan Toratenu, to the season of receiving the Torah. The counting of the Omer, the 49 days of counting, culminates with the 50th day, which is Shavuot. And on Shavuot, the rabbis tell us that was the day of Matan Toratenu, the day of the giving of our Torah. And that Torah is complex and it's challenging and it's demanding and it's beautiful and it's rich and it's everything. It's everything. And so if we, in a process of spiritual refinement, as the Kabbalists see this counting of the Omer period, where every day of every week has a special significance. Tomorrow, we're going to be ending the second week of the Omer, which is the week of Gevurah, the week of restraint, of boundaries, the week of judgment, you might say, as opposed to the first week, which is the week of Chesed, which is all about unbounded love. And then we go into the week, the third week of the Omer is the week of Tiferet, which is really about harmony and balance. How do we hold opposite poles together? How do we live richly spiritual lives and have loving relationships with people and hold to account the injustices that exist in our world, in our country and all over the world? And Tiferet, I think, helps us balance those in our heart, knowing that the two things are not contradictory, but have to be integrated within ourselves. So yes, we, as we look forward to slowly transitioning out of this isolation that many of us have been experiencing during COVID, and we're able to travel a bit, and we're able to open our doors and have more people live in person, and hopefully that will be deeply spiritual to be back together, to be able to pray and sing together again after all of this time apart. And hopefully that will fulfill us spiritually and emotionally. But it's not at the expense of remembering what else is going on in the world at this time of what some people call the Israeli high holidays, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and Yom HaAtzmaut. But they're not just about thinking about the experience of our own people. They're about thinking about how the world is so capable of repeating history if we don't stand up. As it says later on in the book of Exodus, if we can't stand by the blood, we can't stand on the blood of our fellow human beings. And so this is one issue that feels really important. Chaver, the Rabbinical Council of Boulder, is taking this on as an issue, and we're going to be releasing a statement. And so I want to thank Ed Cass for bringing this back to my attention and how important this is. There is a Jewish, you can look online, there's the Jewish movement for Uyghur freedom. There's also a resolution that was passed last year by the Rabbinical Assembly, the Assembly of Conservative Rabbis. There's a statement from the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. So this is not just a non-partisan thing, it's definitely a multi-denominational thing. In fact, the Orthodox community in London has taken this on very seriously. The chief rabbi, who's the chief rabbi of the Orthodox community in London, has said, I can no longer say never again if I don't think about the plight of the Uyghurs in China. So very different kind of message today, but I think it's really important to remind ourselves of our responsibility as global citizens for people in the world who are really, really suffering right now. So today is Yesod of Gevurah, the penultimate day of the second week of the counting of the Omer, and sometimes Gevurah is about withdrawing, and sometimes it's about really getting in there with a sense of boundary. Sometimes the boundary is stepping back and allowing other people in our lives to learn their own lessons, to make their own mistakes. And sometimes it's about being really active in the world, not just this unconditional, unbounded love of Chesed, but a way in which I have to act. Gevurah also means strength. It's determination. A gibor is a warrior, So in order to be warriors, spiritual warriors, as Jews, I think we have to be deeply concerned with all of the relationships. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to, I believe, have some kind of spiritual relationship, and we have to really, really take care of our greater society in all of the different ways that can manifest itself. So may we have meaningful and lives of action on all three levels. Ben Adam la'atzmo, ben Adam la'chavaro, ben Adam la'makom, in our spiritual, social, and in our own internal relationships. Shabbat Shalom.